Hey everyone, this is from Anton Pannekoek and the Socialism of Worker Self-Emancipation, 1873 to 1960 by John Gerber. This is the introduction. I'm also going to read the acknowledgments and I'm going to read the table of contents. So, introduction, chapter 1 is titled The Making of a Socialist, the Milieu of Pannekoek's Marxism. The historical context, society, and social democracy in the Netherlands. Struggling with ideas, Pannekoek's conversion to Marxism. Rank-and-file militant Pannekoek and the SDAP in Leiden. Chapter 2 is titled Mind and Reality, Pannekoek's Methodology. And the sections from that are Pannekoek and Dietzken, The Dialectics of Distinction, Theory and Social Development, the Class Basis of Science, Social Knowledge of a New Kind, Pannekoek's Conception of Historical Materialism. Chapter 3 is titled Dutch Left Marxism in Formation, the Nieuwe Tide Left. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Let's see. Dutch to English. It translates as new time, but it's pronounced
Nieuwe tijd. Nieuwe tijd.
Nieuwe tijd. The Nieuwe Tijd left 1899 to 1906. Let's see if there's anything for that. Not seeing anything for that. The Nieuwe Tijd left 1899 to 1906. From Romanticism to Marxism, the origins of the Nieuwe Tijd group. Quote, first life, then theory. The trade unions, agrarian, and school debates. Deepening of the split, the Dutch mass strike wave of 1903 and its aftermath. According to Wikipedia, the railroad strikes of 1903 were strikes in the Netherlands of the railway staff regarding the right of workers to organize into a union and negotiate and implement the right to strike. At the beginning of the 20th century, some employers allowed their workers to have union membership, while in some companies, union membership was obligatory. This led in January 1903 to a labor dispute in the Amsterdam harbor, which soon spread across the country. Back to the text. Chapter 4, Bringing Socialist Insight to the Masses, 1906 to 1909. The Berlin Years, Theoretical and Propaganda Work for the SPD. Intransigent Marxism on the Offensive, the Tribunist Left. I'm not seeing anything for that I can read off. Chapter 5, Consciousness and Worker Self-Emancipation, Pannekoek's Political Thought Prior to 1910. Consciousness and Socioeconomic Reality, Pannekoek's Theory of Ideological Hegemony. Organization and Ideological Development, Pannekoek's Conception of Revolutionary Praxis. Moral Consciousness and Social Transformation, Pannekoek's Conception of Proletarian Ethics. Chapter 6, Struggling Marxism in Practice, 1910 to 1914. Break with the Marxist Center, Pannekoek against Kautsky. Militants against the apparatus, the Bremen left. Quote, sect or party, end quote, the Dutch SPD. I'm not seeing anything for that. Chapter 7, Mass Action and Revolution, Pannekoek's Political Thought, 1910 to 1914. Revolution and Class Transformation, Pannekoek's Theory of Mass Action. Economics and Social Development, Pannekoek's Theory of Imperialism. Class Struggle in Nation, Pannekoek and the National Question. Chapter 8, War and Revolution, 1914 to 1919. War Against War, Pannekoek and the Simmerwald Left. I'm going to read the Wikipedia intro for Simmerwald Left. The Simmerwald Conference was held in Simmerwald, Switzerland, from September 5th to 8th, 1915. It was the first of 3 international socialist conferences convened by anti-militarist socialist parties from countries that were originally neutral during World War I. 42 individuals and 11 organizations participated. Those participating in this and subsequent conferences held at Kiental and Stockholm are known jointly as the Simmerwald Movement. The Simmerwald Movement. The Simmerwald Conference began the unraveling of the coalition between revolutionary socialists, the so-called Simmerwald Left, and reformist socialists in the Second International. Back to the text. From sect to party, the SPD and the New International. The New Internationalism. Militants against the current, the Bremen Left, and the formation of German communism. The New Socialism of the Laboring Masses, Pannekoek's Political Thought, 1914 to 1919. Chapter 9 is titled The Left Communist Alternative, 1920 to 1926. West European Marxism on the Offensive, the Amsterdam Bureau. One moment, please. Sorry about that. Nature beckoned. The Amsterdam Bureau. That's what I was looking up. The Amsterdam Bureau of the Communist International was an outpost of the Communist International established by the Executive Committee of the Communist International in September 1919. At the same time, the ECCI also set up the Scandinavian Bureau in Stockholm, the Southern Bureau in Kiev, the Vienna Bureau, the Balkan Bureau, and the West European Secretariat. Sebald Rutgers was appointed secretary and dispatched from Moscow with a number of precious stones whose value accounted for the bulk of the 20 million rubles allocated by the ECCI to finance the bureau. Back to the text. Working class organization of the new type, the KAPD and the AAUD. The AAUD stands for the General Workers' Union of Germany, which was a factory organization formed following the German Revolution of 1918 to 1919 in opposition to the traditional trade unions. The AAUD was formed by the Left Communists and the Communist Workers' Party of Germany, KAPD, who considered organizing based on trades as being an outmoded form of organization and instead advocated organizing workers based on factories, thus forming the AAUD. They were influenced by the industrial unionism of the industrial workers of the world. The Council Communists organized these factory organizations as the basis for the region-wide workers' councils. A section of the AAUD, led by Otto Rühle, split from the AAUD, forming the Allgemeine Arbeiterunion Einheitsorganisation. And the KAPD, the Communist Workers' Party, was an anti-parliamentarian and left communist party that was active in Germany during the Weimar Republic. It was founded in 1920 in Heidelberg as a split from the Communist Party of Germany. Originally, the party remained a sympathizing member of the International. In 1922, the KAPD split into two factions, both of whom kept the name but are referred to as the KAPD Essen faction and the KAPD Berlin faction. The KAPD Essen faction was linked to the Communist Workers International. The Entscheidende Linke joined the KAPD in 1927. Back to the text. Pannekoek against Lenin, left communism and the Comintern, between Deventer and Moscow, the CPH and the Comintern. Deventer is a city in the Netherlands, apparently. From movement to sect, left communism in decline. Chapter 10, A New Workers' Movement in Formation, International Council Communism 1927 to 1945. And the sections are from left communism to council communism, the origins of the GIC and the GCC, the permanent crisis, the theoretical development of council communism in the interwar period. Chapter 11, The World of the Workers' Councils, Pannekoek and the Theory of Council Communism, The Workers' Way to Freedom, Rebellion and Council Organization, Organization and Production, the Council State, Ideology and Social Reality, Pannekoek's Philosophical Critique of Leninism. Chapter 12, Revolution and Reality, the Council Idea in the Post-War Period. Quote, Hope is Far Distant, Pannekoek and the Dilemma of the Independent Left. Rethinking Marx, Pannekoek and the Reconstruction of Revolutionary Theory and Practice. And Unfulfilled Promise, Pannekoek in Historical Perspective. So that's the end of the table of contents. I'll read the acknowledgments. The obligations I have incurred in preparing this book are numerous and can never be adequately repaid. Harvey Goldberg supervised the original dissertation version. In addition to putting up with my many idiosyncrasies for all these years, managed to give me a taste for asking the larger questions that historians are supposed to ask. If this work occasionally rises above mere narrative, it is largely his doing. Hyman Berman and Mulford Silby introduced me to many of the issues involved in this work while I was an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota. In the early stages of this study, I benefited greatly from the advice given by the late George Haupt, whose own scholarship in this area has set standards no one else has matched. Julian Howarth also aided me greatly in the initial formulation of my ideas. Mrs. J.M. Velker and Herman de Liagra Boule helped me orient helped orient me to Dutch sources during my stay in Amsterdam. Dirk Struik, the late Paul Maddock, Caho Brendel, and the late B.A. Seehas graciously shared with me their memories. Professor Dr. A.J. Pannekoek provided both invaluable information and indispensable criticism. I'm also especially grateful to the close cooperation from fellow Pannekoek scholar Mark Bokelman. When Mark and I discovered we were working on the same subject, we tended to react as if we were rivals. Fortunately, our good sense prevailed, and we have cooperated as scholars should ever since. I've also benefited greatly from correspondences and criticism from Peter Ratcliffe, Bob Jones, Alain Pugaral, Corrado Malandrino, Neil Bosson, and Dick Wortell. I should also like to express my gratitude to the following libraries and archives and their staff for the use of their facilities and for the assistance which they so kindly provided me. The International Institute of Social History, Amsterdam, the Staatsarchive, Bremen, and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Bonn, and the University of Wisconsin Library. Finally, I thank my wife, Anne, whose intellectual, logistical, and personal support was absolutely indispensable and far greater than she will ever realize. Okay, so now we're to the introduction. Introduction. Anton Pannekoek lived from 1873 to 1960. Anton Pannekoek has remained until recent years a largely neglected and unknown figure in the history of socialist thought. The partial eclipse of Pannekoek that began in the 1920s and the almost total eclipse later do not mean that Pannekoek can be regarded as a purely ephemeral and negligible tendency in Marxist thought. On the contrary, Pannekoek's work can be viewed as one of the most thorough, consistent, and intelligent attempts yet made to develop Marxism as a theory of revolutionary practice. And the neglect Pannekoek has suffered might be considered less the result of a reasoned intellectual judgment than the consequence of a concurrence of unfavorable historical events. Pannekoek's long life and political career spanned several epochs of socialist history. Pannekoek's political maturity coincided with the rise of social democracy. Pannekoek's last years of political life witnessed the first stirrings of the New Left. Pannekoek's writings left their imprint on both movements. During the intervening years, Pannekoek was an international figure active in both the Dutch and German socialist movements. Prior to 1914, Pannekoek collaborated with Karl Kautsky on the Neue Site, taught it in the SPD party schools, and along with Rosa Luxemburg emerged as one of the leaders of the left wing of German social democracy. Pannekoek was one of the first in Europe to understand the fundamental weakness of the social democratic movement and to anticipate the social democratic movement's eventual collapse. Following the outbreak of the First World War, Pannekoek was the first to call for the formation of a new international and later became a prominent figure in the Simmerwald anti-war movement. Although Pannekoek played a pivotal role in the initial formation of European communism and was a leader of the Comintern's Western European Bureau, Pannekoek was among the first to break with authoritarian communism. As the preeminent theoretician of the German, quote, left communist KAPD in 1920, Pannekoek articulated an alternative West European conception of communism and a powerful critique of Leninist orthodoxy, which earned Pannekoek Lenin's denunciation in left-wing communism and infantile disorder. From 1927 until his death in 1960, Pannekoek remained active as the intellectual mentor of the quasi-syndicalist, quote, Council Communist, end quote, movement. On a theoretical level, Pannekoek can be situated within a definite period of European Marxist development, spanning roughly the years 1900 to 1930. Pannekoek belongs to a remarkably able generation of Marxist intellectuals whose concerns were defined by the disintegration of a politically and intellectually debilitating Marxist orthodoxy and the search for new revolutionary alternatives. In Pannekoek's bold and sweeping critique of the Marxism of both the Second and Third Internationals, Pannekoek grasped, perhaps more lucidly than any Marxist of his generation, the authoritarian tendencies in the political movements inspired by Marxism and sought to develop new anti-bureaucratic models of revolutionary transformation. Pannekoek's extensive theoretical reflections, which posed questions that were virtually unique within Marxism at the time, strikingly anticipated many of the most essential contributions made by other thinkers of the Western Marxist tradition. One second. Nature is not calling this time. I am opening a second tab because this document has endnotes instead of footnotes. So where am I? Are they at the very back? Yeah, they're at the back. Sorry. Footnote. The term, quote, Western Marxism has generally been used to refer to an alternative tradition within Marxism, which has stressed the subjective and active elements of Marxism and has focused attention on such previously ignored issues as philosophy, culture, and consciousness. Western Marxism has been counterposed to orthodox Marxism, which has emphasized the structural, economic, and deterministic elements of Marxism. The bibliography on Western Marxism is vast. For a critical overview of this tradition, see Perry Anderson's Considerations on Western Marxism and Russell Jacoby's Dialectic of Defeat, Contours of Western Marxism. The description for Considerations on Western Marxism by Perry Anderson says, this synoptic essay considers the nature and evolution of the Marxist theory that developed in Western Europe after the defeat of the proletarian rebellions in the West and the isolation of the Russian Revolution in the East. In the early 1920s, Considerations on Western Marxism focuses particularly on the works of Lukács, Korsch, and Gramsci, Adorno, Marcuse, and Benjamin, Sartre and Althusser, De la Volpe, and Coletti, together with other figures within Western Marxism from 1920 to 1975. The theoretical production of each of these thinkers is related simultaneously to the practical fate of working-class struggles and to the cultural mutations of bourgeois thought in their time. The philosophical antecedents of the various schools within this tradition, Lukácsian, Gramscian, Frankfurt, Sartrean, Althusserian, and De la Volpian, are compared and the specific innovations of their respective systems surveyed. The structural unity of, quote, Western Marxism, beyond the diversity of its individual thinkers, is then assessed in a balance sheet that contrasts its heritage with the tradition of, quote, classical, unquote, Marxism that preceded it, and with the commanding problems which will confront any historical materialism to succeed it. So that's the description. Oh, that book's way shorter than I thought. It's only 138 pages. I thought it was like a big fat tome. The other book was Russell Jacoby's Dialectic of Defeat, which I think Adrestia's Revolt might have put a video of this, but it might have been something else. The description of dialectic of defeat says, observing that for both revolutionaries and capitalists nothing succeeds like success, Russell Jacoby asks us to re-examine a loser of Marxism, the unorthodox Marxism of Western Europe. The author begins with a polemical attack on, quote, conformist or orthodox Marxism, in which Jacoby includes structuralist schools. Jacoby argues that a cult of success in science drained this Marxism of its critical impulse, and that the success of the Russian and Chinese revolutions encouraged a mechanical and fruitless mimicry. Jacoby then turns to a Western alternative that neither succumbed to the spell of success nor obliterated the individual in the name of science. In the 19th century, this Western Marxism already diverged from Russian Marxism in its interpretation of Hegel and its evaluation of Engels' orthodox Marxism. The author follows the evolution of this minority tradition and its opposition to authoritarian forms of political theory and practice. Back to the text, and I missed a footnote earlier. Obscurity was not always the case for Pannekoek. Prior to the First World War and for a few years afterward, Pannekoek was a widely known figure in the international socialist movement. Commenting on the impact of Pannekoek's thought on the formation of American communism, the historian Theodore Draper has noted, quote, Pannekoek and Gerber were familiar names to many American socialists when Lenin and Trotsky were virtually unknown, end quote. Draper, The Roots of American Communism, published 1957.
I don't know if the beef's going to be done in time.
It's okay. I already ate, kinda.
Check it and put it back in for 12 minutes and see what happens.
Okay. Theodore Draper's The Roots of American Communism. The description for this book says, in this definitive history of the evolution of the Communist Party in America, from the Communist Party of America's early background through its founding in 1919 to its emergence as a legal entity in the 1920s, Theodore Draper traces the native and foreign strains that comprise the party. Draper emphasizes its shifting policies and secrets as well as its open activities. Draper makes clear how the party in its infancy, quote, was transformed from a new expression of American radicalism to the American appendage of a Russian revolutionary power, end quote, a fact that Draper develops in his succeeding volume, American Communism in Soviet Russia. In his special prescient way, Theodore Draper himself had the final words on American communism, quote, is like a museum of radical politics. In its various stages, it has virtually been all things to all men, ... There are many ways of trying to understand such a movement, but the first task is historical. In some respects, there is no other way to understand it, or at least to avoid seriously misunderstanding it. Every other approach tends to be static, one-sided, or unbalanced, end quote. Draper correctly notes that the formative period of the American communist movement has remained a largely untold and even unknown story. In part, the reasons for this are that the communist movement, although a child of the West, grew to power in the Soviet East. But Draper rescues this chapter with deep appreciation for the fact that communism was not something that happened just in Russia, but also in the United States. This is a must-read for scholars and laypersons alike. This volume is conceived as an independent and self-contained study of the American communist movement. Draper correctly notes that the formative period is largely untold and even unknown. In part, the reasons for this are that the communist movement, although a child of the West, Sorry, I think this I don't know. I feel like this description is kind of poorly edited. In part, the reasons for this are that the communist movement, although a child of the West, grew to power in the Soviet East. Draper appreciates the fact that communism was not something that happened only in Russia, but also took place in the United States. That experience is the focus of this volume. Okay. Back to the text. Now, where am I? Okay. Like Lukács, back to this is the body of the text. Like Lukács, Pannekoek articulated the centrality of ideas and consciousness to historical development and emphasized the organic link between class consciousness and class organization. Like Gramsci, Pannekoek sought to develop Marxism as a philosophy of praxis and stressed the importance of combating bourgeois ideological domination by developing an independent proletarian hegemony. Like Korsch, Pannekoek attempted to strip Marxism of Marxism's concern with metaphysics, highlight its importance as a critical method, and when necessary, use the Marxist conception of history to analyze the history of the Marxist movement itself. Pannekoek's scientific accomplishments are no less prodigious. A pioneer in the development of modern astrophysics, Pannekoek began his studies at the age of 15 as an amateur astronomer fascinated by the Milky Way. In 1891, he entered the University of Leiden. After completing Pannekoek's study of astronomy in 1895, Pannekoek became a geodesist at the Geodetic Survey, and in 1898 was appointed observer at the Leiden Observatory. Pannekoek received his doctorate in 1902 and shortly afterwards began a detailed investigation, which extended over 50 years, of stellar distribution and the structure of the galactic system. Among Pannekoek's many discoveries were the groups of early stars that were later called associations. Upon leaving Pannekoek's observatory post for Germany in 1906, Pannekoek began a lengthy study of Babylonian astronomy and published several articles on the subject. Returning to Holland after the outbreak of the First World War, Pannekoek found no vacancies in astronomy and was compelled to teach at the high school level. In 1919, Pannekoek finally secured an appointment at the University of Amsterdam, where in 1921 Pannekoek founded an astronomical institute that now bears Pannekoek's name. It was here that Pannekoek undertook his groundbreaking work in astrophysics. During this period, Pannekoek was one of the first to study ionization and line intensities in stellar atmosphere. Pannekoek also developed a method of determining distances to dark nebulae and applied modern photometric methods to study the sun's atmosphere during solar eclipses. In addition to Pannekoek's other research concerns, Pannekoek also maintained a lifelong interest in the history of astronomy, which culminated in Pannekoek's influential book, A History of Astronomy, an excellent and original study emphasizing the interrelation between the evolution of astronomy and society. Among Pannekoek's many awards was the Gold Medal of the Royal Astronomical Society, the highest honor in Pannekoek's profession. When Harvard University selected 72 of the world's most distinguished scientists and scholars to honor with honorary doctorates at its tercentenary celebration in 1936, Pannekoek was one of the 4 recipients in astronomy. Footnote: the best sources of information on Pannekoek's astronomical career is his own scientific autobiography, something in Dutch. End footnote. Despite the broad contours of Pannekoek's thought, Pannekoek's social theorizing in the latter decades of his life often seemed out of tune with the times. A romantic and utopian holdover from an earlier phase of the socialist movement. Following Lenin's judgment in left-wing communism, communists and social democrats alike vilified Pannekoek for what they considered his extreme radicalism and rigid stands. Until recently, much scholarly treatment followed a similar pattern, which was often reinforced by the inaccessibility of key documents. When evaluated positively, Pannekoek often merited no more than a footnote. The resurgence of conflict among students and workers in the 1960s, however, led to a renewed interest in issues of democratic participation and worker self-management and a search for an anti-authoritarian Marxism, which occasioned a rediscovery of Pannekoek and Pannekoek's main concerns. What resulted was a flood of anthologies, reprints, and translations of Pannekoek's writings in at least 8 languages and several accounts of his work. Footnote: the 2 most useful overviews of Pannekoek's Marxism were both written by Council Communists. Serge Brechner, I think that's how you say his name. Bressanier? I don't know how to say his name. It looks like Braconnor, you know what I mean? So, um, um, yeah, I have that piece by Serge Braconnor, or however you say his name. Shit. Which has appeared in English as Pannekoek and Workers' Councils. Shit. Why was I trying to look it up in French when I could have done that? Second. Yeah, I'm not seeing any like detailed description for Pannekoek and Workers' Councils. Anyway, back to the text. And the other one is Caho Brendel, Anton Pannekoek, Theoreticus van het Socialismus. I think that might have been translated into German by K. Ihre Verlag. One second. Caho Brendel, Anton Pannekoek, Denker der Revolution. So it's translated in German. And the description says, the theoretician Rosa Luxemburg has been trivialized as a kind of guilty conscience of both social democracy and party communism. What has been lost is what Luxemburg's writing criticizing the Russian Revolution of that Rosa Luxemburg's writing criticizing the Russian Revolution of 1917 was also the founding manifesto of a new current of radical workers' movement, the Council Communists. In particular, the Dutch Marxist Anton Pannekoek, who lived from 1873 to 1960, whose intellectual biography Caho Brendel presents here, worked out the content of this new anti-Leninist and anti-reformist orientation in the areas of epistemology, political economy, and the theory of workers' councils, which aims at communism not as a state event but as the free association of producers. Caho Brendel's book, which first appeared in Dutch in 1970, was translated into German by Brendel himself and revised. It also shows the topicality of Pannekoek's critique of the old workers' movement. And it says of the author, Caho Brendel, born 1915 in The Hague, Council Communists joined the Dutch Group of International Communists, GIC, in 1934. Caho Brendel was the co-editor of the Dutch magazine Spartacus from 1952 to 1954 and Dad in Gedachte, 1965 to 1998. In the Federal Republic, Caho Brendel became known through Brendel's speech in 1971 at the Kronstadt Congress in Berlin on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Kronstadt Commune, as well as through various publications in German, including Leninist, A Strategist of the Bourgeois Revolution, published in 1973, Autonomous Class Struggles in England, 1945 to 1972, published in Berlin in 1974, Theses on the Chinese Revolution, published in Hamburg, 1977, and Notes on the Reformation of the Revolutionary Left, which was published in Die Action, which is in 1994, which I guess is a revival of the old artistic journal Die Action. So back to the text. Among the anthologies that have appeared are Hans Manfred Bach's Pannekoek Gerber, A. Pannekoek, H. Gerber, Organisation und Taktik der proletarischen Revolution. Seeing if there's anything for this. There's no description of that book by Hans Manfred Bach. I think Hans Manfred Bach is like a historian of like syndicalism and just general like kind of like libertarian like socialism and as it's in Germany. And Jaap Kloosterman, Anton Pannekoek, something in Dutch. I think I actually have an article on here that's by Anton Pannekoek. I mean, not Anton Pannekoek, Marcel van der Linden, another Dutchman. Who another, which is like a piece in a like dedication. It's kind of more of a common thing in Europe where people have like books to like, you know, devote to particular authors, on like their 70th birthday. So like for instance, like like in I don't know, say I wrote say I was a famous person, someone might compose a compendium dedicated to me on my 70th birthday, because I'm just such a genius. So I apologize for making you sit through all of these books that I'm looking up, especially because so few of them are actually yielding anything. But I like looking up the books because it kind of gives me like an overview of like just kind of like the state of the literature on some of these people, you know what I mean, and some of these subjects that I'm reviewing. But yeah, I didn't find anything for any of those books, so yeah. End footnote. What was that footnote? Okay. While a necessary corrective to the earlier view of Pannekoek, much of this work was marred by its uncritical and partisan character. Still others delved into particular phases of Pannekoek's career in isolation from other phases. Footnote: included in this category is an article by Paul Maddock in French, an article by Hans Manfred Bach in German, and a piece by H. Schruer, Anton Pannekoek, and the Origins of Leninism. One second. Let's see if there's anything for that Schruer bit. Yeah, I don't have it. I can't find an abstract for that either, so. Okay. End footnote. Back to the text. In spite of this renewed interest, no published treatment of Pannekoek has appeared which is at once comprehensive and free of partisanship. Footnote. The only detailed study of Pannekoek's entire career undertaken until now has been Mark Bokelman's unpublished 1982 University of Toronto PhD dissertation, The Development of the Social and Political Thought of Anton Pannekoek, From Social Democracy to Council Communism. End footnote. In a sense, one of the aims of the present study is to fill this gap by providing a comprehensive and critical exposition of Pannekoek's contribution to socialist and democratic thought. But at the same time, this work aspires to be much more. What I have also sought to do is reconstruct the historical circumstances in which Pannekoek's theoretical development took place. To fully understand Pannekoek's Marxism, it is necessary to critically examine the social movement in which Pannekoek was involved, the intellectual and political traditions which shaped Pannekoek's concerns, the experiences and learning process by which Pannekoek came to his ideas, and the means by which Pannekoek sought to test and implement these ideas. Examined in such a manner, Pannekoek's political career provides a privileged perspective from which to explore the possibilities and limitations of revolutionary Marxism in Western Europe during the first half of the 20th century. In particular, a consideration of Pannekoek's activities raises complex questions about the role of theory, as theory intersects with social movements and popular struggles. Consequently, one of the underlying aims of this study is to examine the extent to which Pannekoek's theoretical conceptions were grounded in social reality, the extent to which these ideas played a role in shaping reality, and the extent to which they were ultimately circumscribed by the reality he sought to transform. It is hoped that by looking at Pannekoek's long effort to develop a Marxism that was both revolutionary and democratic, and the difficulties Pannekoek encountered in this task, we may be better able to understand why revolutionary Marxism took the form revolutionary Marxism did after 1920. Thank you so much for listening.